in this arena. So if you're trying to change power, you have to ask who participates inside the decision-making arena, but you also have to ask who's not there that ought to be there, and how can we get their voices into the process? How can we overcome the barriers? By giving them the knowledge, by setting the meetings in a time they can attend, by strengthening the, giving them the, doing it in the right language, and so on. But then the theorist of power said, wait a minute, there's a third form of power. And that's what we call invisible power. So invisible power is the internalization, sorry, a lot of big words here, of powerlessness, so that people don't even realize they have the right to a voice in the first place. Okay, so hidden power is when the power that is keeping issues off the table, but people are aware, and they're aware of their voice and they can't get to the table. So something is a blockage there. Invisible power is when people aren't even aware of their issues, of their voice, of their rights to speak. Can you give an example from your work?
A lot of the vulnerable affected communities are not aware that they have a voice in the policy.
People aren't aware they have a voice in the policy.
Yeah, the affected communities.
And they accept it. That's the way it's meant to be, right? It's acceptance. This is the acceptance of the status quo, even when that status quo is wrong, by the people themselves. Another one related to disaster reduction. I hear, you must also hear. That's not man-made, it's an act of God. Yeah? It's not something we can do anything about. Why should we participate? This is the way the world is meant to be. So you don't have to have power in the public arena. You don't even have to create barriers to keep voices from coming to the arena if people don't believe there's a problem that they can do anything about in the first place. Please.
Hi. Sorry, a very quick practical example. When the participating organizations were asking the questions as part of Views from the Frontline, many people said, well, I mean, why are you asking us those questions? In any case, no one will hear us.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, we heard this from different people, and even we felt a bit powerless when we got that feedback.
So if you have a culture, a culture of disempowerment, that's the main barrier, not the exercise of power. And if you look historically, the most powerful systems are ones that develop the belief in people of their own legitimacy, or that they are impossible to change. So once you have that definition of the problem or that system, the powerful don't have to do anything because the people aren't raising any questions because they don't believe that change can happen or that they can make that change happen. Okay? So if you're dealing with a case of invisible power and you're trying to change that, the internalization of powerlessness, what kind of strategies do you use? Just an example.
Maybe promoting transparency, trying to bring those invisible issues out into the open.
Getting them in the open, creating a public space that they can be talked about. I find there's a big difference between what people talk about in their own rooms, in the safety of their own rooms and houses, and what they talk about in public. That's another difference. Okay, what else do you do to deal with invisible power?
Voices of children and women, they are more honest.
Okay, so, but what if those women and children don't believe they have a voice? What do?
Raising awareness.
You do raising of awareness. And then you have to talk about how you... So this basically is about awareness building strategies, of which there are many. There was one in the room. Is that what you were going to say? Knowledge. And you talked earlier about knowledge and how disempowering the lack of knowledge can be, particularly in this field. Your field is climate change, DR, it's become such a professionalized field. People, how can I participate? I don't know all those words. Please.
A very practical example of something that's happening around this very, very difficult question of fatalism and, act of God.
Yeah.
I'm happy to say that for the first time in history, the World Parliament of Religions, which took place in early December in Melbourne, Australia. It happens every 4 years, and it's all the religions in the world meeting together around issues like environment, etc. They had a panel on disaster risk reduction and faith communities. And there's a growing movement to work within faith communities to dispel these notions of powerlessness.
So that's very important, because where do these images, where does this sense of this invisible power come from? Lots of times it comes from education, from religion, from family, from socialization processes that fail to teach people that that this is a problem that can be changed. And so if we're about advocacy, it's not just about advocacy here, but how do we engage with those processes? Now, very quickly, you're going to get more chance at your tables later to elaborate these. I just want to get us examples so people make sure we're understanding. If we're trying to deal with hidden power, now hidden power, I'm aware of my problem. Let's say I'm an empowered woman or child. I'm aware of the problem, but somehow my voice still doesn't make it on the agenda. What do you do then? What are the strategies for overcoming hidden power? Examples? Well, you begin to mobilize. Sometimes an individual can't speak, but if they mobilize with others, they gain collective voice to get their issue on the table. Yes, another one.
I just would like to address when you try to address the different forms of power, you should take into account the time horizon that it takes to change. Because, for instance, if you want to raise the voices of women,
that's right.
You can create women organizations, but that does not necessarily lead automatically to that men are hearing their voice, for instance, because this takes much more time.
Absolutely. And we're going to see in a minute about how difficult that is. So if you're trying to challenge hidden power, you talk about mobilization strategies, you talk about forms of collective action, you talk about creating those fora where new voices can be heard in the community. But then let's say you've got aware people who are mobilized and are going into these open policy-making agendas. What strategies do you have to have there? It's what you all do, right? You've got to have good advocacy strategies. You've got to know the language. You've got to be able to argue with people on the facts. You've got to be able to win the debate once you're in the room. Okay? So the challenge is, if we're working on this form of power, is the challenge you just raised. How do we do all of those in our movement? Some people are really good at this, at advocacy and around technical knowledge in that open arena. Some people are good mobilizing. Some people are doing that long-term awareness building. But as this person said earlier from India, how do we have the alliances to do all three of those may be important. So how do we do that? Okay? So that's the first problem with power. It's going to get more difficult. So you got this one. This is the easy bit. Increasingly people write about, and I think you all have experienced, that all these power relations get more complex because of changing patterns of globalization. So you have to ask about what kinds of power are you trying to change at what level of decision making. So many of you talked about how do we bring about change in the local community. I was talking to my friend from Nigeria who's a local government. But how can you bring about whose voice counts in that local government? And she was saying, yes, but what local government has to do is go to change national government. And so how do we mobilize at that level? And then earlier we were saying, but actually on these issues of climate change and DRR and all that, where's the real decision making going on now about resources?